Good evening. We are about to, it's the weekend almost, it's Thursday today. We are about to get ready to Shabbat's weekly Torah portion, Naso. We're reading the fourth book of Torah, the book of Bamidbar, the book of, in English it's called Numbers. In Hebrew it's called Bamidbar, which means in the desert, of course. And this Torah portion has, among other things, has one of the most significant symbols of what Judaism stands for, and one probably of the very important commandments that was performed back in the temple by the priests, by the Kohanim, and traditionally still is done in the synagogues around the world when the Kohanim are blessing the people. And we read about it in the Torah. We read the text of the blessing in the Torah. Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and may He protect you. The second one, Ye'er Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka. May God shine His face upon you and be gracious to you. And finally, the third one, Yisam Hashem panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom. May Hashem turn His face to you and grant you peace. This is a very beautiful, very important blessing of the priests that we are been doing traditionally in our synagogues. The Ashkenazi custom, prevailing Ashkenazi custom in the lands outside of Israel and diaspora is only do it during the holidays of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So we're somewhat missing this on a daily basis. Our brothers, Sephardic Jews, we know we have a Sephardic synagogue, big one here in Manhattan Beach. They do it regularly. They do it every day, as every community in Israel does on a daily basis. So this is a beautiful, beautiful idea of a blessing, and there's somewhat of a thrill in this concept and the idea of Kohanim, the priests, being able to bless other Jews. And one can actually ask quite a few questions here in the regard of what's happening, what's actually going on here in terms of the blessings. First of all, we can ask a question. We had many different leaders in the Jewish people, among the Jewish people, during the ancient period, during the years, formative years. We're talking about a first temple period. Besides the priests in the temple, we had the kings, we have the prophets. All of these people were leaders. So why specifically the priests and not the kings, for instance? Why wouldn't the king be able to give a blessing to his people? Why wouldn't a prophet be able to give a blessing to his people? What is so unique about the priests? Maybe sages or saints. We also had tzaddikim, righteous people, saints. We had sages. They could also be given a blessing. Specifically, this is given to the priests. That's our first question here. A second question is, it seems from the text of the Torah tells us, tell Aaron and his sons. Aaron, of course, being the first Kohen, the first high priest. He was the elder brother of Moshe, right? Moses' elder brother. So he's going to be the first one. And his sons, the next generations, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. In other words, it's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. It's not just a suggestion in the Torah, it's a commandment. And we understand this to be a mitzvah. We understand this to be a commandment. And that's how, in all the generations, we're going to have Kohanim, the priests, giving this blessing to people, right? By the way, this is among the oldest of all the blessings that we know in Jewish tradition ever. Probably among oldest continuously used words of blessing throughout the whole human history. This is quite remarkable. This particular form of blessing has a very, very, very long history and a beautiful history. I'll get to that a bit later. I'm going to show you something interesting that was discovered and now is on display in Israel Museum. But before we get there, I'm going to ask a second question. My first question, if you remember, was why the priests? Why not prophets? Why not kings or sages or saints? The second question is, why do we have this unique form of a blessing being a mitzvah? Why it's something that is a commandment? How can you command to bless, right? It's like you cannot command to love somebody. Although we do find it in the Torah, we are commanded to love God, which is actually a question. How can one be commanded to love? But that's for a different class, not for this one. For now, we're asking a question, how can one be commanded to give a blessing? Maybe a priest is of character that he doesn't want to bless anybody. He happens to be a guy who's very negative. He doesn't want to give any blessing. Yet Torah tells him, because you're descendant of Aaron, the high priest, you're going to be blessing people. You need to do that. That's part of your job. That's part of your job. Actually, the word Kohen, we translate it as a priest. But the word Kohen, kehuna, means service. So he needs to understand that his role, his privilege of being a Kohen, servant in the temple, is actually to be a servant to his people as well. He's serving his people. And part of his service is to give a blessing. But how can one sanctify and make it into something that just becomes a mitzvah, becomes a commandment? You must do it. If a person doesn't feel like doing it, how is he going to do it? It's the second question we got to ask. And finally, and I think that question is most important one, isn't God supposed to give us blessings? How can we take blessings from other humans? We're supposed to take the blessings from God. However, we see in Judaism, we also have this idea that humans can give blessing to each other. And at this point, we have high priests being commanded, and not only high priests, but the priests being commanded, Kohanim being commanded to give blessings to the people. So, Rabbi Sachs, again, one of my favorite rabbis, I'm going to share some of his thoughts about this. Answering the first question, he basically says like this: there is a famous commentary, one of our very important books on Judaism, which was actually a book written by a father to his son for his bar mitzvah, to prepare his son for a bar mitzvah. It became a very popular book. He wrote it literally for his son. He called it Sefer HaChinuch, the book of education. It was literally a book written by a father to his son, and it became so popular because what he does in this book, he goes over all the 613 mitzvot, all of them, and explains, first of all, where it says in the Torah. What does the mitzvah mean? How it's being practiced? What do you do? So he created this little Jewish encyclopedia for teenagers, right? But it actually becomes a very popular book. It becomes one of those Jewish bestsellers. Everybody wants this book because it was pretty rare. People didn't write books like that. Today it's very popular, right? Like all those little compendiums on something. When you open a book and you have Judaism for Dummies, right? And all stuff like that. So this was probably the first version of this back in late medieval times. Sefer HaChinuch. The author probably lived in Spain. By the way, the author was anonymous. His intention, it seems, was just to write a book for his son. I don't think his intention was ever to publicize it. So until today, it's not clear. It's a bit of a puzzling situation. It's not clear exactly who wrote the book. But we know roughly this was in a circle of one of the students of Nachmanides somewhere in northern Spain, some time in a medieval period. And so he says like this, the author of this book says like this: who are the priests? Who are the Kohanim? They were a sacred group of people. They were the people working and servicing the temple. They were, so to speak, ministry in the house of Hashem. So they spent their whole life, what they did was serving God. Their whole life, that was their job. Their job literally was to serve God. That's how they called. They called Kohanim servants, right? That's their life's work. And so their life's work, their habitats, they live very close by the temple. They spend their whole life in the temple. They literally live the temple, and they are the guardians. That's their role. Their role was to be the guardians of what we call Dusha, of holiness. They were literally the guardians of holiness. So it's an obvious choice. It would be an obvious choice that if you think about different groups within Jewish people, who's going to be given a blessing? People who serve in the temple, people whose job is to get close to God and bring the whole Jewish nation closer to God. They're going to be the ones to do this particular thing, to give a blessing to God's people. However, there is another explanation, and it's actually very interesting. When I was reading this Rav Sachs, all of a sudden it was like, hello, this explanation is given by Reb Aaron Wolkin. And it happens to be Reb Aaron Wolkin was teaching in my yeshiva many, many years ago. I remember him well. I remember this person well. He was one of my teachers in yeshiva back in Israel. And actually, he's a very interesting person. He was born in Shanghai, China. You know how Jews ended in Shanghai, China? They came there during the war. There was this famous train that some Lithuanian Jews from Mir Yeshiva in Poland, eventually, when Poland was occupied by Germans and the Soviets, they were lucky enough to be in a Soviet zone of occupation. So they managed to escape to Lithuania, which was still independent for some time. And then they were given an opportunity to escape when Lithuania was also occupied by the Soviets, to escape. So they were on the train because they got some transit visas, Japanese visas, to come to Japan. So how would he come to Japan from Lithuania? You would have to cross all of Russia, Siberia, many, many days. They were like, for a few weeks, they were on a train. It was quite a remarkable journey. There were books written about it. Fascinating. There was a story of one of the yeshiva bochum, one of the boys from yeshiva, who was very curious. They were told, because they don't have any Russian Soviet transit visas, and the Bolshevik state is not exactly very friendly to religious Jews, you're not allowed to leave the train, even for a second. You would have to stay on the train, like us, right, in isolation, but actually very, very difficult isolation. We can leave, at least come outside the house, we can do a little walk. They could not do that. And one of the boys at some point said, enough is enough. He decided to take a look what's happening, and nobody saw him ever again. He left the train and nobody saw him ever again. That's how it was. So finally they made a journey to Japan, and finally, because Japan actually was a Nazi ally, Nazis, learning upon the fact that so many Jews came to Japan, they were pressuring Japanese to give them over to concentration camps. Now what Japanese did, actually, was very funny. They did believe in some way, in a very curious way, they did believe the protocols of the elders of Zion. They were translated to Japanese. So they, instead of hating us for that, they thought, well, Jews must be really superior. Jews must really be in control. So instead of us, messing up with such a powerful race, with such a powerful nation, we better become their friends. So they were very scared of messing up with the Jews, because they believed the protocols of the elders of Zion. They thought that we control the world. So what they did, the Japanese, because they had those obligations to the Germans, they couldn't keep those Jews in Japan. What they did, they said, okay, fine. At the same time, they didn't want to destroy the Jewish people. They didn't want to send them to concentration camps. They sent them to Shanghai, China, which was occupied by the Japanese forces. But Shanghai also had international zone. So they took him to the border between a Japanese sector and international zone and said, over there is international zone. You're free to do whatever you want. If you stay here, we'll have to arrest you. So they kind of hinted them, get out of Japan, move to international zone. And that's how these Jews ended up spending the whole war in Shanghai, China. And Rabbi Aaron Wolkin, and later on Mashgiach in my yeshiva in Jerusalem, was actually born in that family of Mir Yeshiva rabbis. He was born in Shanghai, China. So he wrote a book, and it's a commentary on the Torah, basically, a modern commentary on the Torah. So he says something interesting. He gives kind of a prosaic explanation, but it's an interesting one. It says like this: Kohanim, priests, they were specifically focused, their whole job was to be in the temple, and therefore Torah does not allow them to be landowners. They are out of all tribes. The tribe of Levi, the priests, would not be able to share any portion in the land. Their sole income would be coming from whatever gifts they would be given by people. There are all sorts of gifts, matnot keuna they called, that people are obligated to give, tithes, and some other gifts they're getting. That would be their sole source of income. So think about it. It's actually very interesting. Imagine you have a Kohen, you have a priest that happens to be not particularly nice person. Nobody likes him. He's looking down at people. He's very arrogant. He's very haughty. He's treating people badly. And now let's say I look at this guy. He's my neighbor. And naturally, I'm thinking who I'm going to give the tithes, who I'm going to give the gifts. I can choose between different Kohanim. Am I going to give it to him? Most likely not, because he's not a particularly likable character. And most people probably would do the same. So he would end up having very strict diet. He wouldn't be able to eat much because nobody would give him food, right? So it will be a good incentive for this person to think, because he's so much dependent on the people, to become a better person, to treat people better, to start smiling to people, start being nicer to people. It's literally the question of his physical well-being, a question of how much he's going to eat in his family. So says Rabbi Aaron Walking, that could be the reason, because Kohanim really had so much interest in being better to the people. That could be the reason that to help them grow in that direction, Torah actually prescribes the priests to regularly practice blessings. When you bless people, you give them a word of blessing, you automatically develop some sort of bond of love. You develop certain feeling of bonding, certain feeling of connecting to that person when you bless them, when you give them a blessing. So that would be a school for the Kohanim, for the priests, to become better Jews, to become, better people in a way, which is an amazing way of looking at it. By giving a blessing with a full heart, they would eventually benefit at the end, because people would like them more, and they will become more likable to people. Now, going back to the second question, we had a question on why it's this blessing is formulated in the form of a commandment, in the form of a mitzvah. Why is it an obligation to give a blessing? Kohanim actually make a blessing before they make a blessing, before they bless people, they make a special bracha, special blessing, in which they say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, the standard beginning of blessing. Blessed are you, Hashem, God of the universe, right? Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav. It's the one who sanctified us with his commandments and gave us a mitzvah of blessing his people, that's the Jews. And at the end it says, be'ahava, with love. Blessing his people with love. Mitzvah is not just to bless people. Mitzvah is to give this blessing with love. So we understand that Kohanim are almost prescribed to be that love source, that love, container for the Jewish people, for Klal Yisrael. It's part of their mission. It's part of their mission statement. That's what they need to do. As people close to God, they need to be the ones who disseminate love, who bring in love, who bring in that feeling to the Jewish people. And this blessing, we have different blessings in Judaism. We have blessings, for instance, when you eat food. This is a blessing that's not an obligatory thing. If you don't want to eat food, you don't need to make a blessing, right? So this is a blessing. It's called Birkat Kohanim, the blessing of enjoyment. Because you want to enjoy food, you make a blessing. You say, thank you, God, for having given this opportunity to enjoy this apple, or to enjoy this martini, or to enjoy whatever we eat or drink, right? Thank God we have so many opportunities in that sense. But this is not an obligatory thing. However, mitzvah, commandment, is an obligation. So here, given this blessing as an obligation is actually telling us something very interesting about the nature of what is happening here. We understand that it's an obligation from Hashem's perspective, from God's perspective. It's an obligation. If you're going to be close to me, says God, if you're going to be a priest, it's your obligation, it's your daily mission to work on being the instrument of love. You're going to be bringing love into the world, and when you're going to make this priestly blessing, you will connect with people by showering love on people, by being that, almost like that source of love. And the idea, of course, is we understand that God himself in Jewish tradition is described as the ultimate connection, as the ultimate love. The act of creation of the world was act of love and kindness, as our Kabbalists are telling us, because God doesn't really need, he is the Almighty, he has everything in his world, he doesn't have any needs, he doesn't have any deficiencies, right? He's absolutely perfect. So the act of creation was basically a desire to give, and a desire to give, an ability to give is essentially what love is about. So Kohanim are being trained to be the givers. By every day repeating that blessing, they have been trained to become that kind of vehicle of love, vehicle of that connection that comes through ahava, that comes through love. Now, why is it in a form of obligation? Because we understand certain things we need to remind ourselves daily and regularly, and if we don't do that, we're not going to do that. You know, we never forget to eat because if we forget to eat, we have a natural instinct, we have hunger. Our body is telling us, give me food, I need food. We don't have very often the same understanding when we are low on what I call vitamin G. We are low on what I call vitamin L, love, right? We don't have that natural understanding that we need to give it to the world. We don't feel it. So for that reason, God is helping us with making it part of our daily routine. That's how we have Shema prayer, where we constantly, daily focusing on the idea that God is the source of love and connection, by proclaiming his unity, and by saying that we are obligated to love God. The obligation to love God is because he is our Father. He is the source of everything that is in the world. And by us recognizing it, we actually recognize who we are. From mystical, Kabbalistic perspective, we are not physical bodies. We are not this shirt, right? We are much, much deeper. We are souls. We are essentially sparks of godliness. Each and every one of us is a manifestation of divine presence in the world. For us to recognize that, we need to act in such capacity as someone who are souls, someone who are manifesting presence of God in the world. How are we going to be able to do that without us reminding ourselves, because our physical body is not aware of it. Very often we are aware of our physical needs, much more so than we are aware of our spiritual needs. So our rabbis instituted all sorts of things. We have regular blessings, we have regular prayers that help us to grow and help us to stay tuned, to stay connected, and to recognize that we are not just physical bodies, we are souls. Now priests have an extra level of obligation because, as we say, the French say, noblesse oblige, nobility obliges. They, being the priests, working very, very closely with God in the temple, and they need to be doing more than everybody else does. And they do something which I would call an upgrade of a Shema prayer. Shema prayer is us recognizing that God is the source of love, and we are being called upon to recognize it and to love God. This way, connecting all those fragile elements of the world, all those things that seemingly disconnected and create a lot of friction, create a lot of disharmony in the world, create a lot of problems, what we see as problems. It's eventually coming from us as Kabbalists are saying, us misunderstanding and not seeing how everything is interconnected and interrelated, how every single person, every single event is part of a bigger picture, and God is playing this huge, huge puzzle. He's connecting all the elements. We don't see the huge puzzle, and we get frustrated and upset about certain pieces that don't seem to match according to our little understanding. However, by reminding ourselves that God is the one in control, God is the one who constantly loves us and constantly cares about us, we say Shema and we recognize this idea. What Kohanim are doing, they are called upon not only to recognize it mentally, they are called upon to give that love that they receive from God and channel it to people, channel it to everybody. They do it on a daily basis. In the temple, they used to do it every day. They still do it in Israel and the Sephardic communities. By us, it's only 3 times a year. It's a very special occasion to be part of the Kohanite blessing. And people who are blessed to be born in the family of a Kohanim, they have this obligation. It's an opportunity. It's also a responsibility to be the person who's blessing others. Because that, of course, means if you bless other people, you got to be, uplifting yourself to become that source of blessing, become that source of love. So whoever Kohanim among us, I know some people who are listening right now, we're having some Kohanim in the audience. I'm not going to point any fingers. You guys are lucky But you guys are also, being part of the VIP club. In our religion, it's actually more responsibilities. So you guys are lucky in one hand, but in the other hand, you also take in that huge responsibility, carry it on your shoulders to make sure that you every single day, you keep it up. You are the source of blessing. You are the ones who are going to rechannel this blessing coming from God to our people and give it to us. So that's an amazing, amazing thing. Now, the idea, we said, that was our third question. Our last question was that how come we humans, flesh and blood, can give a blessing to each other? Isn't God the one who's supposed to be giving blessings? So it seems that in Judaism, we have this understanding that part of what we are supposed to be doing, it's not just to be passive agents and recipients of God's love, but rather God really wants us to be partners. God wants us to be in a mentality of entrepreneur, not in the mentality of somebody who's just coming and working hours from 9 to 5 and 9 to 6, right? And receives a salary from God, and that's it. Leave me alone. The nations of the world, they're not seeking, until now, we're not seeking so much connection with God. They were more in that mentality. That's how they did not receive the Torah. But eventually, we hope there is a big awakening now in the world, and we're having our, friendly religions of Christianity and Islam. They both came and developed from Judaism. So over there's also this movement, this awakening and understanding, and we need to be more proactive. But this is actually a very Jewish idea, that we are seeking connection, and God on his part wants us as active partners. And that's the reason how Abraham becomes so important. He's the first Jew, and he's setting an example. He's even arguing with God. He's like a good student who says, teacher, that's not how you told me. Remember the story of Sodom, where he's arguing with God saying, it's not really what you taught me. You're going to destroy the whole city on behalf of a few wicked people. There must be some righteous people there, so don't destroy. Don't destroy. That's not what you told me. That's not mishpat. That's not a proper justice, not a proper judgment. And we know that's exactly what God likes. He wants us to be proactive. He wants us to be involved. And what it means essentially, eventually, Abraham will be told that you got to be the source of blessings. So we, the Jewish people, seem to carry this beautiful idea and understanding that it is not only possible, but it's important for us to take a proactive role in not just to be recipients of divine love, but also to be the donors, to be the givers. What we receive, we are capable of giving over. If you think about this beautiful image of overflowing, when we're doing Kiddush on Shabbat, usually tradition is we put wine in a goblet and it's supposed to overflow. This overflowing goblet of wine symbolically represents the idea of bounty, the idea of us being full of blessings. We receive everything we need from God. And how is it possible for us to receive everything from God and at the same time to be a giver? In material, physical world, if I am having $200 and somebody comes to me and says, can I borrow $100 from you? I would need to think about if $100 is something I can afford because I only have 200. If I got to give 100, I got to be left with only 100. So I'm going to have less. The more I give, the less I have. But that's only true about material world. In the spiritual world, my friends, it's actually the opposite. The more I am getting from God, the more I am sensitive to the idea that there is unlimited source of blessing in the world. My receptacle, in the language of Jewish mysticism, my receptacle, my kli, whatever I can accept grows. Because as far as God is concerned, the blessing is unlimited. My capacity to receive the blessing is limited to my ability to take it. And how do I grow in that ability? By becoming a source of blessing myself. The more I'm willing to take and the more I'm giving to give, the more I'll be able to take. So the more I'm giving, the more I'll be able to take from God. The more I become a giver, the more I'll be able to take. And this is very, very beautiful. This means that actually it's exact opposite of the material world. When I am a giver, I will be able to have more. Do you understand what this is? This is unbelievable. It's a beautiful, beautiful concept and idea. So what happens here is we're having this practical training, and the Kohanim, of course, set an example here by giving a blessing. The more they give blessings, the more they themselves being blessed, right? And everybody can practice it, not only according. We can give blessings to each other. We can, what is a blessing? A blessing could be just any word we say with a good intention in heart, with an intention in heart that the other person should experience something good in his life. And that, my friends, is a huge, huge way of becoming spiritually rich and wealthy in spiritual terms and feeling good and content about a life. The more we are capable of being people who are blessing, like the Kohanim, like the priests, the more we are capable of being givers to others, the better we're going to feel in our personal life. And by the way, modern day psychologists are not necessarily speaking about it from spiritual or religious perspective, but they totally agree with that. And there have been many researchers done on that particular subject of how a person who is capable of being a giver is going to feel way better about his life. Even though objectively you may not be a rich person, you may not have all the things, all those little things that people are having today, and he may potentially, have more reasons to complain about his life than somebody else who's not a giver, who is actually thinking about the world and about life as a place, an arena of conflict, an arena of struggle, and he's trying to get more and more and more for himself. For the most part, a person like that probably going to feel never satiated. And that's what the Talmud says. When you have 100, you want to have 200. But when you have 200, you don't want to have 300. Now you want to have 400, because how much you have is exactly how much you're lacking. How much you have is exactly how much you're lacking. The only way out of this is by saying, I've got whatever I need. God is giving me the blessing right now. I may not be the wealthiest person in the world, but thank God I have a bread and water, and I have my basic needs being addressed. And thank God, I think today we have more than basic needs being addressed. Thank God for that. And whatever else God is sending my way, I gotta say thank you for that. And I'll be able to become a person who is full and not lacking. And by being a full person, I will be able to give without feeling that I'm becoming, by giving something, I'm becoming all of a sudden less than what I was before. Because the truth is, in spiritual terms, you only become more, as we just explained. So this is really a beautiful idea. Now I want to show you, I promised you to show you something interesting. And these are actually, this is something that is sending us back to maybe 30, 40 years ago. This was, I think, in the 90s. We're holding by 2020, less than 30 years ago, maybe 20-something years ago. I'm going to share with you this article. This is coming from the website of Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Israel Museum in Jerusalem is the place that holds a beautiful collection of Judaica, as you know, and the Judaica section there is pretty big. And the most important, or one of the most important artifacts in the Judaica department in Israel Museum is what you see right now on your screen. These are actually a little bit bigger than the original size. They're really small. We're looking at, you know what we're looking at? You see on your screen, priestly benediction on amulets, 6th century BCE. That means 2,600 years ago, roughly, right? Going back, imagine we're right now on a train that sends us back to the ancient days of ancient past. And we're traveling back in time, going back to 6th century BCE. Wow, 600 years before Jesus. A few hundred years after King David. We're still holding in the era of the first temple, or maybe the very end of the first temple. Some people actually say it's been dated even earlier, 7th century BC, or maybe even 8th century BCE. The dating here is very, very conservative. But anyhow, it's quite impressive. You know what they managed to decipher on these little amulets? They are silver made, as you can see. They managed to decipher, and they had to do a little bit of a deciphering. They needed. It was written in the ancient Hebrew script, which we don't use today. Today we use the script taken after the era of Babylonian exile. We call it Assyrian script, but the ancient Hebrew script that was used throughout the period of First Temple. If you ever go to take a look at Israeli shekel coin, on Israeli shekel coin, they use this ancient Hebrew script. In ancient Hebrew script, lo and behold, archaeologists found written the priestly blessings, Birkat Kohanim. These exact words that we started our lecture with, written in the Torah, in our Torah portion, all of a sudden appeared on these amulets. And when it appears on an amulet, it is telling me that this was something that common people were using. It was like a piece of jewelry. It was something that people were using for a blessing, right? They kept it maybe in the pockets, or they were using it as a little piece of jewelry or something like that. So amulets, right? With one of the most ancient words of blessing in continuous usage throughout history, my friends. Something very, very impressive. And the person who found it was one of my teachers, an archaeologist by the name Birkat. He's an Israeli person. He studied in Oxford. He has really good English, very, very good English. And actually, he wasn't the one who found it. One of the people in his team was the one who found it, of course. And a person who found it, when he showed it to Birkat, Birkat was stunned. He realized right away this is something very special. Now, this was found in a place, Ketef Hinnom, which is literally in the city center of Jerusalem. Now, the story is quite remarkable. When they were, I don't know how many of you have been to that area in Jerusalem, close to what they call Cinematheque, the old cinema, overlooking the old city from the western side is this neighborhood. And they decided to build a youth center dedicated to Begin, Menachem Begin being one of the very charismatic prime ministers of Israel. He accomplished a lot of reconciliation in the country. He managed to give the voice to underprivileged, to Mizrahi Jews, to the Sephardic Jews, the religious people in Israel who were kind of a little bit, or maybe not a little bit, underprivileged in the country. And he was that voice of reconciliation. That's why if you ask any taxi driver in Israel, who's your favorite prime minister in Israel, they're all going to tell you Menachem Begin. They all loved him. And he was a very, very lovable person. He really was a very warm person, very good Jew. So Menachem Begin Center was about to be open at the place. But before you can build something in Jerusalem or in Israel, for that matter, you need to do archaeological dig. Because, you know, anyway in Israel, where you're going to dig, you're going to find something important. So that's a very useful law. If there wouldn't be a law like that, we wouldn't be able to find those amulets. But because there was a law like that, before they could start building, they would send an archaeological team. And Birkat was in that team. And lo and behold, when this person from his team is showing him this article, this little artifact that they found, it was pretty small. I think it was around this big, maybe not really small, something they put in your pocket. But he was stunned. He realized right away this is something very, very important. Of course, some research was done, and they, lo and behold, they dated it 6th or 7th century BCE, and it has the text, very same text that appears in the Torah, the text of the priestly blessings. In other words, this was something that everybody knew around the time. People practiced it. People were looking at it with affection. They kept it as a, like you want to keep a little piece of blessing with you, right? Carry it with you, that type of relationship. So really, really beautiful. Now, I wanted to show you something else here. And let's take a look. I hope it's going to work. I tried it beforehand, so it should work. Okay, so oh no, not this one. Sorry, wrong. This was for the first part. Okay, so yes, I'm a little bit technically challenged, as you know. You gotta bear with me, I'm sorry. But now, this time, I think this is the right link. Yes, priestly blessing. So this website is telling us a little story of the priestly blessings, priestly benediction. It's called raising of the hands, nesiyat kapayim, raising or rising of the hands, rising to the platform. The idea is that the priest would raise their hands And how they're going to make a blessing, they would have their fingers split in a particular manner, right? And nobody would be able to look when you are taking part in priestly blessings. I've seen this custom in some synagogues. I don't know where this comes from. For some reason, some people turn their back to the priests, to the Kohanim, but that's not the right way to do it. That's probably coming from the understanding that you're not supposed to look at the Kohanim out of awe, out of sense of respect. You're not looking at them when they give a blessing. Back in the temple, we say, when Kohanim, the priests, would be given that blessing, literally divine presence would be so intense in the temple so that you wouldn't be able to look. You wouldn't be able to look. You would have to turn your sight a little bit down out of respect. And that's what people usually do. If they wear talus, they put the talus on their heads, or they just close their eyes, or they just look a little bit down, but certainly not turning around, because that would basically imply, I don't want to get your blessings, Kohen. I don't need your blessings. And that's certainly not what we want to accomplish, right? We do need blessings. We do want those blessings. Now, on this picture, which you've seen before, this is, of course, the plaza in front of the Western Wall, in front of the Kotel, and you see a huge crowd. Now, on the holiday of Sukkot, one of the pilgrimage holidays in Israel, it's a beautiful time of the year. It's usually around October, right? So what happens is one day of Sukkot is dedicated to priestly blessing, and you have hundreds, if not thousands, of Kohanim priests coming from all around the country. And it's a very, very special occasion. You see those Kalesim, hundreds and thousands, sea of white, and then thousands of people coming, and you hear that blessing pronounced by thousands of Kohanim, literally together. You know, they say when people do something in unison with the same intention, it has a tremendous power, tremendous power. So thousands of people given the same blessing, and Jews come from all around the country just to be there on that very, very special occasion. Usually it's one of the days of Chol HaMoed Sukkot. It's quite amazing. So next image would be this one that you already saw. This is on the right side, you see the actual text, what they could decipher. Right here on the right side. But on the left side, you see the actual amulets from Katef Hinnom, right in the city center of Jerusalem, discovered in the 90s by Professor Barkai, archaeologists, and eventually it became one of the most important artifacts at Israel Museum. This one is a typical grave site of Kohanim. You know, Kohanim have until today certain laws. They're not supposed to defile themselves, and so they usually don't go to funerals. They can only go to funeral of their very close relatives. That's actually halacha. It's a Jewish law because they're not supposed to be in touch with what they call impurity, tumah. State, an idea of impurity is when a physical body and a soul gets disconnected. They get disconnected. This disconnection, the body without a soul, results, which is the state of death, results in what we call impurity, certain lacking, something is missing here. So Kohanim are not supposed to be close with the sources of impurity. Therefore, they usually don't take part in funerals, and therefore they are also having a dedicated place at the Jewish cemeteries where they're going to be lying. And usually at the grave sites, you're going to see the sign of the priestly blessing, like over here. You can see the sign of the priestly blessing of the Kohanim right here. And right, you see, I'm showing here with a spotlight, you see the two hands in the sign of the priestly blessing. The next one is the image from one of the synagogues. It's a contemporary synagogue built actually before World War II, I believe, in Holland. And you also see, okay, of course, Magen David and the two hands raised in the priestly blessing. And this one, the Kabbalistic take on it. You see, you have many letters here. Don't even ask me what all these signs are about. I'm not great in Kabbalah. I'm certainly not a great Kabbalist or anything like that. But this is one of the very typical images that you find on in Kabbalistic literature and Kabbalistic books one of the recurring themes is the theme of the priestly blessing, Birkat Kohanim, because it has tremendous spiritual power. It's one of the most powerful blessings that person possibly can experience as far as Jewish tradition believes, as far as Jewish tradition is concerned. So it's very, very, very important. And what can I say? I'd like to finish with us doing a little prayer, because I think this lecture was not just about theory. This was also a little bit about a practice of us becoming, as we can say, part of the solution, not part of the problem. This world needs healing. This world needs love and compassion. This world needs us being aware of that we can become a source of blessing for the world, each and every one of us. We can right now turn ourselves into a source of blessing for ourselves and for people around us and for the world. So we're going to recite just the first paragraph of Shema. That's all we're going to do. Not too many words, right? So it's not going to be very difficult. It's going to be quite easy, I hope. We're going to say that prayer. I will share with you, hopefully, if it's getting open, I'm going to share with you a website, a page, where we're going to see Shema prayer, and you're going to see it on your screen, hopefully soon. And we're going to recite a Shema prayer together. You're going to see the text in English, in Hebrew, and also transliterated. Just the first paragraph of Shema. It's going to jump because of the advertisements. They always do that. Yeah. But now we can come down and take a look at the actual text. Okay, so here we have the text. Here we have the text of Shema. We're going to do the actual line of Shema, the first line. You know, traditionally, for us to concentrate, we close our eyes. Some people have a tradition, they cover their eyes like this, like that image you saw on top over here with ladies covering their eyes with Shema. This is done for concentration. Yep. The idea, of course, is that the first line of Shema is the most important one, but we're going to highlight the text now, the transliterated version of it I'm going to highlight right now. And in a different color, I'm going to highlight the English text. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. We actually had a session recently on this prayer, so there's going to be a little bit of a, almost like doing a little bit of a homework, but also hopefully, we hope this is going to be very practical. We hope it's going to help us to get healed. It's going to help us to become a source of blessing, become a source of bracha for ourselves, for people around us, and for the world. That's, you maybe even take a little 20-second preparation, right? Getting ready for what we're about to say. We're about to charge ourselves and people around us with a good energy, with the energy of love and compassion that comes from recognition of the fact that God is the one who's in charge. God is the one who wants good things for his people, for the whole world. And these good things are going to certainly happen. And they're already happening. And we are part of this process, of this very important process of healing and growth. And God, who is one, is the source of all the elements that somehow very often we see not connected at all. And some of them appear as very negative and disturbing, but we may not understand how it all works out. And all this huge puzzle is going to finally make sense. Maybe not now, but eventually. For now, all we need is this recognition and understanding that God is the source of all the elements, and all the elements are interconnected and interrelated. And the unity of God is what brings love. And therefore, the very next verse is going to be about love. So for now, we're just going to close our eyes. Let's take a little break, 10, 15 seconds of silence to prepare ourselves for this line, for Shema Israel. It's been highlighted here. In red, it's transliterated. Many of you know it by heart. We're going to say it together. Let's do a little breathing. A few seconds of silence and preparation. And we're going to say Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. When we say the word Echad, we think about unity of God. We think about how all the elements in the world are connected and how God is source of all the blessings in the world. Next line usually is recited silently. We say, going to highlight it now, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. It's been said silently, which means blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. And here comes the first paragraph of Shema, taken straight from the Torah. This is the text in Deuteronomy chapter 6. I'm going to recite it traditionally in Hebrew. When I'm going to recite it, I'm going to highlight every line. And you're welcome to take a look at the English translation that you see here. This is the English translation, right? And there's also transliteration a little bit further down in the text, I believe. No, there's no transliteration. So we're going to use either English side if you want to follow in English, or if you want to follow and read with me in Hebrew, I'm going to highlight the Hebrew reading right now. ואהבת es Adonai Elohecha bechol levavecha ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאויס על ידיך והיו לטוטפויס בין עיניך וחשפתם על מזוזויס ביתך ובשעריך. So you have the English translation here. Let's take a look at the English translation. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. I'm going to use a different color here for English. We spoke about this idea of love being the most important element. That's what gets us connected. And that's how unity of God is experienced through love, through this bonding. And that's how we can see the unity of God present in the world when we're able to connect to his agents. And who's his agent? Everybody in the world at the end of the day is the agent of God's presence. We just need to recognize his presence, which is everywhere in the world. Take to the heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. This is something that we need to learn and teach our children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you are lying down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. It's talking about the feeling. That's the feeling on the hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. That's the feeling on the head. Over there, of course, we know inside the boxes of the tefillin, you have this text written. And that's how we perform this commandment. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And of course, we're having each and every doorstep in the house is usually having mezuzah, right? There's one here. There's one over here. And the idea, of course, is that every single time we pass through the doorstep, which has a mezuzah, and inside the mezuzah is a scroll with these very words, it's not only a source of protection for us, it of course is in most practical ways, also in mystical ways, but it's also a source of blessing. The fact that it helps us to remember who we are, what's our mission in the world, and helps us to be the source of blessing for each other. I'd like to finish this lecture with saying thank you very much for your time, and let's hope and pray for the world to be healed, and let's hope and pray that we will be the good agents of love and compassion for each other. Let us say Amen.